Hey, I'm going to walk through the Ibanez Q52PB and try to give you a clear picture of whether it actually fits the kind of playing you do, without any of the usual hype. When you're eyeing a new electric, the biggest worry is ending up with something that looks great on the wall, but feels like a compromise when you plug it in and start riffing. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon, and I'll try to make that decision a little less stressful by focusing on real-world use, hidden trade-offs, and where the value really comes from. First off, let's talk about the type of player who usually reaches for an Ibanez series. These guitars sit in the entry-mid range, aiming at gig-ready beginners, intermediate players who need a reliable workhorse, and hobbyists who want a decent tone without breaking the bank. If you're the kind of guitarist who spends most of your time at home jamming, recording demos in a small project studio, or playing in a local band that doesn't demand exotic specs, the Q52PB lands squarely in that sweet spot. On the other hand, if you're chasing boutique vibes, need ultra-thin necks for fast shredding, or you're a professional who can justify a six-figure custom shop instrument, this one will probably feel like a compromise. The body of the Q52PB is made from Nyatoh, a wood that's often compared to mahogany, but with a slightly brighter edge. In practical terms, that translates to a warm low end that still lets your mids cut through a mix. I tried it in a typical live room setup with a modest 15-watt combo amp, and the rhythm tones held up nicely when I cranked up a bit of gain. The Poplar Burl top adds a visual flair, but it also contributes a subtle grain that can affect how the wood vibrates. In my experience, the tonal difference is subtle enough that most players won't notice unless they're switching between high-end spruce tops and this kind of body daily. Two humbucking pickups sit under the pickguard, and they're the real workhorses of this guitar. They're not the kind of high-output monsters you'd find on a metal shredder, but they give you a solid, balanced output that works well for classic rock, blues, and even a clean-tone funk groove. When I ran a clean chord progression through a studio interface, the signal stayed clear and didn't need any extra EQ to sit nicely with a bass track. However, if you plan to push a lot of distortion and expect the pickups to stay articulate at screaming volumes, you might find yourself reaching for a pedal or two to tighten the low end. That's not a flaw, just something to keep in mind if you're aiming for heavy modern metal tones. The neck is a maple Bubinga blend, which is a little unusual for guitars in this price range. The Bubinga component adds a bit of stability, and the overall feel is a medium-fast profile that feels comfortable for both chord work and lead lines. I spent an hour playing scales up the neck, and the transition from low to high frets was smooth, no sudden dead spots that sometimes show up on cheaper necks. The maple fingerboard gives a bright attack that pairs nicely with the humbuckers, especially when you're doing single-note runs. One practical downside is the fingerboard radius. It's a standard 12-inch radius, which is fine for most styles, but can feel a tad restrictive if you prefer a flatter board for ultra-fast tapping. Now let's get into the practical strengths that matter after you take the guitar home. First, the tuning stability is impressive. I didn't have to double-check the strings after a full set of bends, and the locking tuners held their place through a decent amount of aggressive playing. Second, the weight is moderate, around 8 pounds, so it's comfortable enough for a 3-hour gig without feeling like you're holding a piece of furniture. Third, the finish is low-gloss cosmic blue, which is eye-catching without being garish, and the low-gloss surface is less prone to showing fingerprints and smudges in a gig environment. On the flip side, there are a few practical weaknesses to consider. The bridge is a standard hardtail, which some players love for its simplicity, but it doesn't offer the fine-tuning adjustments of a tremolo system or a high-end locking bridge. If you're used to subtle pitch bends or need to quickly drop your low E to D, you'll have to rely on a separate pedal or a different guitar. The electronics are wired in a classic series parallel configuration, meaning you won't get a true humbuckeringly sound without the bridge pickup. For most players,